So in the past, when I've given the beginners talks, for those of you who might have been here, I have focused pretty frequently on kind of understanding exactly what a Python package is, how you install Python packages, what that actually looks like on the file system. I've also recommended a tool called pipenv, which helps you manage virtual environments and dependencies. And unfortunately, while I think pipenv is a really great idea, we have found as we've tried to transition to using it in a production environment that it's just not ready yet. And so we ended up having to decide on a different tool, and we did some research, and we ultimately landed on a different tool that I basically just want to introduce you to. So I'm going to do a little bit of rehashing in terms of what installing a package actually does on a file system. Sorry about that. And then we're just going to look a little bit at the tool, and then I'm going to give way to Alex here, who usually does a fantastic job, and let him give us a intro to ODBC. Show of hands, who does not know, and it's okay to not know. You don't have to feel bad about admitting that you don't know, but it's going to help me know how deep I want to go into this for the beginners. How many people do not know what a virtual environment is? Royce. Anybody else? I got one, maybe in the back. Oh, two. Yeah. Okay. I'll just assume your hand's up for all of this. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to deep dive into virtual environments then. I'm just going to let you look into that, since you seem to know what it is, and or since you raised your hand and said you weren't sure, maybe half. Essentially, a virtual environment is a way for us to have per application dependencies installed. Python was built in such a way originally that your dependencies were installed at the server level. That might have worked maybe in the past, but as Python has become more popular and we've had more applications, that method really doesn't work, because you can have one application that needs Django version 1.0, and you can have another one that needs Django 2.0, and now you've got Django that needs to be installed in the same location on the OS's file system, and they conflict, and that creates problems. And so they came up with virtual environments as a way to segregate dependencies. If you know or work in Node, or Node has Node modules, Ruby has bundler, and I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I think it all ends up going in the same directory, doesn't it? Like, just create a vendor directory or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, but most modern languages have a way for managing your dependencies per project in virtual environment, is how Python, or is the method that has taken the lead in the Python ecosystem. There's multiple tools to manage virtual environments. The main tool is just virtualenv. And if you use virtualenv, you got to decide where am I going to actually put the virtual environment on the file system, and then I have to activate it. There's tools that have grown up around virtual environment to make that process a bit more transparent. One of the main one is virtualenv wrapper, which you can look up if you want to. Basically, it knows where to put your virtual environments, and then you can just create them and activate them and remove them at will. And it's just a better user experience for a developer. I have a sweet spot for a tool called Vex. It's not updated a lot. It's from 2015, but it last update 2015, but it still works very well, and I just find it easier to use than virtualenv wrapper. And so you're going to see me use that here in just a second. Once your virtual environment is created, then you have to be able to install packages in it. That's the whole point, is to be able to use things that are on, usually that are on PyPy. So PyPy is the de facto package index for the Python ecosystem. If I wanted to, give me a library that somebody knows and is popular. Flask. I was waiting for somebody to say Django. I'm so glad you said Flask. I like Flask. We use Flask at work. So Flask, you could go here, you could read about it, but more importantly, we host or PyPy hosts the packages that would be downloaded. And so if I created -m means make this virtual environment instead of giving me an error if it doesn't exist. R means remove this when I'm done with it. I don't want it to hang around, because for me it's just temporary. And then I'm going to name it. And so Vex is going to create that virtual environment behind the scenes. I have my virtual environment. There's environment variables set up to tell it Vex where to put that stuff. For me in particular, it just goes in my personal temp folder under virtual env. Can you see that? Do I need to make that bigger? I need to make that bigger. Oh, I see. The resolution is. All right. How far can I go over? Not that far. I'm guessing by the question, the answer is no. Now I am? Yeah, okay. And this thing is really annoying. Oh yeah, that's gonna be annoying. We'll see how that goes. How far can I go over? Okay. Yeah, you gotta be kidding me. It's still there. Well, we'll hope it stays going. Let's see. This is really, really annoying. I did, I'm sorry. All right, how am I doing? Good? Okay. So my virtual environments now have a DerbyPy folder, which is the one I just created. And inside of that is going to be 3 folders. The one I care most about in terms of installing packages is the site packages folder. And you'll see that right now we've got a few basics that pip actually virtual env, that virtual env installs in each new virtual environment. And as I install things, it's going to install into this directory. So just to give an example of that, and note on the left that I have DerbyPy here. This is a shell. It's a modification I made to my shell to show me which virtual environment I currently have active as a reminder. The instructions on how to do that are out there. You can Google them. A lot of times they'll actually be in the introduction to like virtual env wrapper or Vex in the README. They'll have information on how to do that. So I'm going to install Flask. Oh, Flask 8. And if I now list that directory, we're going to see that we have all the packages that Flask depends on. We have Click, which is a CLI library. We have Flask itself, Jinja, It's Dangerous, etc. So all of these packages got installed by pip. But the key thing I want to point out is versions. What version of these packages got installed? How does pip decide what to install? That's right. It's going to install the most recent version available on PyPy, or if you've changed your package index to a different one, whatever the most recent version is what it's going to install by default. There are times when that ends up becoming problematic, either because you have a version conflict, or maybe there's a backwards incompatibility that you don't want to import. And so one way to pin, to keep a dependency at a certain version is called pinning a dependency. So one way to do that, if I wanted to, is I could actually do pip freeze, which is going to give me the list in the versions. And I could actually pip freeze that into a requirements file. And now if I print out that requirements file, I have all of those dependencies and they're pinned and they're the exact one. So if I had an application and I was deploying an application in a production environment, hopefully you're going through a couple of steps to get there. First of all, the developer themselves are developing that application, hopefully running tests. Hopefully then you've got a CI system, continuous integration system, that once you've checked in that code or pushed to a branch, that CI system is running your tests. And then ultimately you have to deploy. And one of the things you have to be careful of is, because there's time differences between the time that you install to your local virtual environment, that the CI picks up and installs its dependencies, and then your actual production deployment system, however you do that, installs its dependencies. If you just do kind of a pip install or a Python setup.py, you could end up with different versions being installed. So you test it locally and you're at Flask 12.4, and then CI tests it and you're at Flask or 0.12.4, and then you go to deploy and they just happen to release 1.0 with some breaking changes, and all of a sudden you've deployed to production and you have the wrong version of Flask. It's not what you tested, and everything is blowing up, and you might get fired or at least chewed out. Or if you've got nice bosses, they understand, but they tell you to do it differently next time.
So looking at this output here that you put in the requirements file with the double equals, is this like valid Python code? Is this some special format?
So this is a special format that pip uses, and that also I'm pretty sure is defined in Python peps, which Python peps are Python enhancement proposal, and they essentially create, when there's a standard to create in the Python ecosystem, you'll find it in a pep. So I think there's actually peps that govern the format of the lines in these files, and then pip and other tools can read these files.
Okay.
Yeah, so what's the difficulty though if I just keep this? So let's say as a developer, I say I'm always going to have all of my packages pinned to every version that's currently in my virtual environment. What's the difficulty of doing it this way? Like, I could check this file into my source code, and then when I'm installing in CI or I'm installing as in my deployment, in order to get my virtual environment set up, I could do pip install -r requirements.txt. So let me show this maybe. Let's do pip install. Huh. Wasn't it DerbyPy? Oh, it's not, because I had the remove flag on it. Great. So I'm going to recreate that now. We're going to show that pip freeze has none of those things in it. Pip freeze is empty. There's no longer any things in my virtual environment. And so now I'm going to pip install Flask equal to 0.12.4, which I'm pretty sure is the last version. Okay, so now I'm going to pip freeze, and we'll see that Flask is pinned to this version. Anybody have a question about that, what I'm doing here? Okay, so now I could pipe that to temp DerbyPy requirements. Boy, I'm having a real hard time here. Was what flashing? I don't know.
When you get tab complete, there's no.
Oh, there's no options. Okay. Boy, I could have swore that I froze that. But anyway, we'll do that. Pip freeze requirements.txt ls cat requirements.txt. And again, I've got that output in a file. So now, if I wanted to exit here again, I've removed that virtual environment. I'm going to create it again. There's nothing in there. I'm going to install -r for requirements file. That's the option to use in pip. Temp DerbyPy requirements.txt. We'll see that I have all of the same versions that were pinned into that file. So I could do that. I could check that into my code. I could use it in CI, and I could use it in my deployment process to make sure that what I'm testing locally as a developer, what CI is testing, is ultimately what gets deployed to production. What's the problem with pinning all of your dependencies like this and having this be the only way that you manage dependency versions? You can set up some kind of check as they move forward.
You're going to need to, or potentially, I mean, if you're not hosting the source tools, and eventually, let's say, upstream or something like that.
Yeah, so you could have something move upstream, get removed upstream. The thing that we typically run into is if you keep this, your packages never upgrade. It's really hard as a developer to look at this file and to know, unless I leave comments in it, which I could do, okay, this pin actually matters to me from an application development perspective, because right now we've got Celery version 4.2.1 conflicts with PyTest anything greater than 4.1. And so I want to pin both of those dependencies as a developer, and I want to leave a note and probably put an issue in my application tracker noting that I'm waiting for Celery 4.2 to get released so that I can upgrade PyTest, right? But if I have all of my dependencies pinned, it's harder as a developer, whether it's me, myself coming back to the project or it's another developer working in the project, to know what was intentionally pinned or what was just pinned by virtue of the fact that everything has to be pinned using this method. So it's hard to understand what the intention of the developer was as opposed to how the tool is implementing pinning. At the same time, we really do want to pin everything. If I only pin Flask to 0.12.4, but It's Dangerous happens to upgrade from its whatever version to 1.0 and break something in production, that also matters to me, right? I actually do want to know both what are all of the versions of all the dependencies, but then I want to be able to express developer intent in a way that's easier and not as verbose. And then in a way that's easier to upgrade as well. So pipenv used to be the way that I recommended that you do that. Unfortunately, as I said, I don't think it's production ready at this point. There's too many significant issues in the issue tracker, and I think it's gotten so much attention, the maintainers are struggling, and I appreciate that. I feel for them, but as somebody who has to push code out to production, we ultimately decided to move away from it because there were too many weird cases where it just frankly was not working. So I did some research. The two alternatives that I found, one of them was Poetry, and the other one was pip tools, which primarily provides two tools, one called pip compile and the other one called pip sync. And so I will demonstrate the usage of that here. So virtualenv is a way to manage virtual environments. Actually, it is kind of the de facto way. I guess actually Python itself has a module now for that, but I still think virtual environment is winning. These tools are what you use to help manage your dependencies. How do I specify what packages I want installed in my virtual environment? And then how do I actually get, once I have it specified, how do I actually get those packages installed into the file system? Yep. So all of the tools that I've talked about, except for Poetry I think actually does some things on its own. But at least for pipenv and pip tools, they both use virtualenv. Actually, they're going to assume a virtual environment. They're going to, I'm sorry. Pipenv will actually take care of both virtual environment and it will take care of dependencies. Pip tools is only going to take care of dependencies. It's going to make you manage your virtual environment yourself. So that's where virtualenv wrapper or something like Vex is going to come in and help you do that. Pip tools are actually really just two tools. I'm going to demonstrate them here. They're really pretty simple. There is some question when it comes to workflow. So for a development environment, I usually have a set of dependencies that I'm going to need to actually run my application and test it. And then I'm going to have a different set or a superset of dependencies that I actually need locally to develop it. And so there's some things that you can get into about how do you actually set that up when you have two files. I'll post a link in the comment section of an article that I found that does a really good job of explaining how to use those tools. I don't want to go into it. I already feel like this is going a little bit too long. Oh my gosh, it's really going too long. Okay, let me wrap up here. Sorry, Alex. So what we're going to do, we're going to recreate this. Ah, thank you. Yeah, pip install I still have to use pip to install my tools. Now you'll see that I have the tools that pip sync needs to install. And now I am going to, I actually I've started naming them common. Okay, so I can now do pip compile. All right, and notice that by default it just outputs it to the console. I'm gonna just pipe that to. So now I have two files. I have the one that's for developer intent. I only care about Flask. But then I also have a file which gives me all of my pin dependencies. And when I want to update things, all I have to do is run pip compile again, and it will go through, update all of the dependencies, and spit out a new requirements file with, or if I point at the requirements file, it'll give me all of the updates that I need. If I want to pin, I can still do that.
Does this have a way, as far as developer tip, to say, it's okay if I get version, 0.12.5 or 0.12.6? Like, I don't care about the,
Yeah.
the super.
So you're saying, so basically I think what you're asking is you'd want something like less than or equal to 1.0. Is that what you're asking for?
Something like that. I mean, I don't know if it follows Simver as far as saying.
It does. Yeah. 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 So this would.
Pin at the, not the first number, but pin at the second, or the 12.
Yeah, you'd have to do it with less than or equal to, I think. But or actually, I guess I'd really want to do just less than in this case. And if I do this again, you'll see it still comes up with 0.12.4. Okay, so that's the first tool. Again, all this is doing, this isn't installing anything in your virtual environment. All it's doing is generating a file based on versions, whether you've pinned something or not pinned something. So the other tool that we have, recall that there's really nothing installed in our virtual environment right now. The other tool that we have is pip sync. And now I would point pip sync at the requirements file, and it would make sure that my virtual environment matches exactly what is specified in that file. This is different than doing something like pip install -r, which is not going to do a true sync. It's just going to install. It could leave things in there. It might not upgrade the versions like you think it should. So there's really pip sync is designed to give you exactly what's listed in that file, which I have found very helpful because that's often my intent as a developer is to just get it installed. Okay, so in the interest of time, any questions here? Great. I will post in the comments a couple of articles related to pip tools, pip tools and the workflow there. And if you have any questions, you can ask me afterwards. Alex, sorry this took so long. You're up.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So these are not like the official tools from the Python distribution. Are there any official tools from the Python distribution?
There is a group called the Python Packaging Authority, PyYPA.
Okay.
The Python Packaging Authority does have tools that they sponsor. Pip is one of them. But there's not a blessed one in the sense that like Python is somehow, like it's not part of the Python distribution, if you will. I think that they have a module actually that'll get pip installed for you, maybe, but it's not. The tools to manage virtual environments and dependencies, the tools that are most mature are from the Python community, not a part of the Python distribution itself.